All right, welcome everybody. So this is the first in a series of talking to those that actually do this for a living, and we're starting off with a bang.
You are really like, do this for a living. Wow. I
Well,
don't know about
you don't do this for what
that.
you've been doing this a long time. Sorry, but Russ, this is Russ White. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about his kind of introduce himself, but I know a lot of my students have heard your name over the years. But Russ has many years of experience. I'm just going to kind of read a few things here. Co-authored over 40 software patents. He's spoken all over the world at different events. Participates in several internet standards. You'll see his name on many RFCs, for example. He helped develop the CCDE and CCAr. These are really high top level Cisco certifications. He's the Routing Area Directorate. Did I say that right? At the IETF
Directorate, yeah. So
Directorate.
so
That's the
I can
word I'm
explain
looking for.
Yeah.
But Russ has worked for Cisco, Juniper, LinkedIn, currently at Akamai as a senior architect. He has, I love what you say about experience in designing, deploying, breaking, and troubleshooting large-scale networks. So basically, he is a network engineer. I've known Russ for quite a few years and always enjoy reading his books. He's authored how many? I don't know.
Don't ask, because I don't know. I don't have any idea.
Yeah,
Dude,
all right.
I have no idea.
A couple of them right behind you. So Russ, do you want to say briefly about kind of, what your background is, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So, I mean, my background is weird and varied. So I started out in electronics, actually, and then I went through a phase of doing art and illustration for a living. And I was a music major for several years. I played piano and saxophone. For those who didn't know, those kind of weird things are in my background. And then I went to the U.S. Air Force to do electronic engineering, airfield electronics. You may not know what this means, but like VORs, TACANs, glide slopes, all sorts of things like that. And went through some weird things there, and then ended up falling into computer networking. And when I got out of the Air Force, I decided to go full-time into computer networking. So that's what I've been doing ever since, I don't know, 88, 89, something like that. So it's been a while.
When did you join Cisco? I know you're not there anymore, but when was that?
Yeah, I joined Cisco in 96. So in between the Air Force and Cisco, I worked for a couple of companies where I was doing Novell NetWare, Banyan Vines. I was the Banyan Vines guy for a company. And then I was working for BASF in New Jersey, and I was working in the Advanced Technology Group on Lotus Notes and stuff like that.
So what are you doing now at Akamai? And maybe mention a little bit what Akamai does for those that may not be familiar with that.
Yeah, so Akamai started as a content distribution network. So effectively just caching data at the internet edge to speed up the performance of websites and stuff. So if you go to someplace like LinkedIn or Google or whatever, a lot of the fixed standard images and not the dynamic data is all stored on servers, replicated on servers throughout the world at edge locations. So that's where Akamai started, was the very first CDN provider out there. And then Akamai bought a company called Prolexic, and Prolexic does DDoS mitigation and various other companies. So Akamai does everything from DNS authoritative servers to DNS recursive servers to DDoS protection to web application firewalls to content distribution and acceleration. Technically, I'm part of Prolexic, but being a network engineer, being a network architect, I don't tend to stay in Prolexic land very much. I mean, I do work with Prolexic. We have 40-ish, more than 40-ish data centers that we support, very small ones on the electric side. But Akamai itself has, I don't know, maybe 1,000 data centers that we support globally. Maybe it's, I don't know. I don't actually know how many it is, but we have a lot of data centers we support and a very large network core, probably one of the largest network cores in the world, I would think, in terms of touch points. We are probably as big as AT&T or Verizon or any of the other providers in terms of where we touch down. So, and for like cities we support and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I do. I work on the core a little bit and edge design some and data center fabrics all over Akamai, and then I work around DDoS protection and DNS performance and DNS design for Akamai. So it's basically anything that kind of touches the network.
Now, one of the questions I get a lot from students is that they really enjoy the technology and learning it. And I've got many of the students here online and here with me. Can you give a little brief description? Somebody asked you what a network engineer does. And I know that's a very broad spectrum, but if you're explaining this to somebody just starting out, what would you say that is?
So there's a lot of different things that you can say that you would do as a network engineer. It's going to go everywhere from repairing things when they're broken, network operations center, or handling attacks and stuff like that, security operations center, through designing and interacting with the business side. And to me, the difference between an architect and a designer is just that business element, is the thinking about where's the business going and what should you do to help the business in the long run, rather than just focusing on this particular design problem. And by the way, we have a lot more designers than we do architects in the world. Most people, it's a kind of a blurry line, but most people focus on how do I solve this problem. They don't think about what does that do to the business if I choose that particular solution. There's no pushback from the other direction. So it's going to be everything from racking and stacking to thinking about what I can do on the network in 5 years to today to enable business 5 years from now. And I tend to do more of the latter and less of the former. Less racking. I haven't racked and stacked anything in years. In fact, I rarely even do configurations any longer. That's kind of I do lab stuff, so I do configurations for lab work, but by and large, most of my work is looking out 5 years and saying, if I do this, if I deploy this technology, what can I do that is going to help the business 5 years from now?
And how much, the typical, not necessarily your role, but I know you've done this many times in the past, and you've got some great stories, by the way. I remember one, I think I can mention Disneyland that you once, or Disney, but
Disney World, yeah.
Disney World, that's what Florida.
Yeah.
Anyway, how much of it, what you do is just putting out fires and troubleshooting, or was?
Well, I still get involved with it sometimes, but not as deeply as I used to. So there have been times, like we just had a little bit of an outage or a little bit of a hiccup at Akamai that I was a little bit involved in. And then you might have seen the thing in Australia where they were blaming Akamai for some stuff. I was kind of involved in that as well, just trying to mean time to innocence, figure out that we aren't the cause of the problem. But again, it's going to depend on what area of networking you work on. There's always going to be some of that. You can't really get rid of it. Perhaps maybe 10% of my time is at doing that right now. Whereas there was a time, like when I was in global escalation, 90 to 100% of my time was doing that. And in TAC, 90% to 100% of my time was doing that. So it's going to kind of vary over your career. What you would hope from a career perspective is you would start out doing that and do less of that until it gets down to 30 to 40% or even 10% by the time you're late career. That's what you would hope. But
so that's a great point. TAC, by the way, is Technical Assistance Center, right? think I got to
Yep,
remember
for
my
Cisco,
acronym,
yep.
Cisco.
Yeah.
And I've always encouraged students, I think support is a great way to get started.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Solving problems is, you learn a lot more when things are going wrong or have gone wrong than you do when everything's just working properly. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, definitely. In fact, the first book that Alvaro and Don and I wrote for Cisco Press called Advanced IP, Advanced IP Network Design. The entire premise of the book was, well, we're not really sure we know how to design a network, but we know what breaks. We know what doesn't work because we've seen it all fail. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a book telling people don't do the stuff that fails. And that's essentially that's how that book got started was, this idea of, I've seen every network in the world break, and I can trace those back to root cause. And if I think about a design pattern that doesn't have any of those root causes in it, then that's probably going to be a good design pattern. So yeah, you learn a lot about the way things work by when they break. In fact, I carry this over today. Do chaos testing. Like if you do labs, don't just do working labs, break them, right? Try breaking them, see what happens.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I get, we're in the lab doing things together. I love it when something isn't working or something breaks, because it's like, oh, that's when I get excited. Now, in academia, you can get excited about those kinds of things as opposed to in a production network when you have people knocking on the glass and stuff. When's it going to work? But that's really when we get to learn things. And so I think that's a great piece of advice. I want to ask you a little bit about certifications and degrees. I have, a mix of students, some community college level, going through this, looking at certifications, taking a whole bunch of different, networking classes, the Cisco Networking Academy classes, going for their CCNA, or taking Linux and security classes and cloud. And I have a lot of great university students here, many of them with me here as well, getting their degrees in various things, a lot of computer science engineering. What is your thoughts on both certifications, degrees? What kind of certifications, if you're a university, you might be interested in? I know you have a lot of thoughts on this.
So my general overall view on this is that people tend to go one direction or the other too much. They tend to dive only into degrees and the educational world, or they tend to dive into certification. I mean, I see people, I have 7 CCIEs and 6 JCNIEs and blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. The truth is, you probably haven't learned a lot after you get your second CCIE or your second expert level certification.
By the way, CCIE is Cisco Certified Inter-Network Expert, one of the top Cisco certifications. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So I think that, you need to think about this as a human being, not as a machine that's trying to be efficient towards making money. That sounds kind of strange, maybe, but we tend to have a view in engineering that we optimize things for the non-human stuff. We tend to optimize things for making money or for the business or whatever, but there's actually a huge human element here. And so I think there's a danger in the engineering world of becoming almost over-certified and not thinking about the rest of life. So what I love about college degrees is that what I like about about certifications, by the way, is not the, we need to the thing I love about certifications is not so much, sorry, I get distracted there for a second, is not so much that I'm trying to get the certification. It's that this is a body of knowledge that somebody who's done this before thinks is important for you to know to do this. So it's almost a learning path more than it is a goal in and of itself. The goal is to learn that stuff against that blueprint. Now, I know that there are things in certification blueprints that are not, necessarily awesome. And I know that all the problems with certifications. One problem that all certifications have is you write an initial set of questions, and the initial questions are awesome because you have the entire domain that you've written in the blueprint to do things. Then once you've written those questions, somebody's got to come along and write questions that don't overlap with those. So the domain becomes narrower and narrower and more esoteric as time goes on, just because of the nature of writing questions. So I get all that, but still, I think that if you treat certifications as a guide path to get where you want to go or to learn a particular technology, they're a very good thing. Now, degrees, on the other hand, what I like about degrees, and I have a few, just a few degrees, and I have
Master's, doctor.
I have two.
Stuff.
I have a bachelor's, 2 masters, and a PhD. So I have a few degrees. And what I really like about degrees is they give you the opportunity to explore, and they kind of force you to explore areas outside the strictly technical realm. Now, I know people going to college hate their English classes or their language classes or whatever it is. Frankly, I find those to be extremely important and useful because communication is a superpower. If you can do tech, but you can't do communication, you can't do anything. You're out the window. Genius only takes you so far. You got to have hard work back there. So like I did a PhD in philosophy. I'm a tech. Why would I ever do a PhD in philosophy? Because it's really important to understand people and the way they think. And it just makes you more of a person. And so I think they have advantages. And my general philosophy is, get one or get the other, get both, but get both eventually. Maybe focus on getting a degree for a while and then go get certifications. Do them both at the same time at different levels. And, maybe do a stair-step thing. I'm going to get my CCST, I'm going to get my CCNA, and I'm going to get my bachelor's or my associates, and then I'm going to go get a CCIE and get my bachelor's. And then I'm going to go, however you want to do that. But you can flip back and forth between the two different types of educational paths. And I think it's very effective and useful to do that.
It's a great advice. And I agree. I'm always telling, communications is so important. I always remind students I had to rely on my looks and charm for all my
Yes. If you learn nothing else, learn how to write. I'm serious. If you learn nothing else in life, learn how to write, because that is like beyond doubt.
So
clarifying.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, it just clarifies your thought process.
Yeah. And I think, so that kind of takes us into, getting a job, because I think most students, at least maybe their parents, want them to get jobs at some point. So what kind of, I know this is tough, but what kind of advice would you give students? They've taken classes. They might have that CCST certification or maybe a CCNA. How do they get started? What that internship, jobs, any thoughts on that? I know it's a broad question.
Yeah, it's a broad question. I think tech support's a great place to start. A lot of people don't want to do tech support because it's hard, but I actually think it's a good place to start because you'll learn a lot very quickly. Don't be afraid to start small. But on the other hand, don't allow yourself to get trapped in small. And I think that's what people do. I know a guy who's worked for a church, and it's going to sound weird. It's a big church. He's the IT director for a big church. He's been working there for many years. I'd say 20 years now. And from time to time, he'll say to me, I'd like to get out of the church scene and do something in a company of some other kind. But it's really hard because when I go to another company and say I'd interview, they're like, you're the IT director for a church? How much could you know about VMware? Like, yeah, but they do run VMware in this church. It's that big. So part of it's positioning, and part of it is just realizing, the character actors who only play bad guys, right? They get trapped in it in their first role and they can't ever play anything other than a bad guy. Don't be that person. Intentionally focus on building alternate paths forward to be able to play more roles than that over time. And of course, education is going to be a key there. But that's my biggest piece of advice, is to be a little more intentional about, I'm not going to be trapped being a not person. I'm going to set some goals and think about how I can do this. There's nothing wrong with being a knock person for the rest of your life if that's what you want. But if that's not what you want, then think about how to get to where you want to go. And don't think of a job as being an end goal or an end state. Think of it as being what you're doing right now. And by the way, Rick, don't get married to your company.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's bad news.
Yes, you need to have a life and be prepared to have the skills to take you. The company isn't gonna, it's not like it used to be. Well, I know with my parents and stuff, you joined a company, stayed there for 40 years.
Yeah. No.
And would you be like, one of the things I sometimes suggest to students is they're looking for somewhere to get started, and just really starting out at a small place, helping out, at a school, a church, someplace where they can just get involved doing something and actually getting some hands-on experience, troubleshooting, setting things up, getting some experience that way as well.
Yep. Oh, definitely. Without a doubt. Internships are great. And then, like I said, don't be afraid of going to work for a small company or a startup, particularly when you're young in life. Startups are a great place to be. Like, I'm a bit beyond the point where I could do a startup, I think. That's kind of my impression of things. Maybe I'm wrong, but startups are great when you're in a position where you can take the risk of losing 5 years of your life to something that doesn't work out, right? Before you have kids, if you don't have kids yet, before you have settled bills, things like that. Startups are a great place to be for some period of time. They will consume your life. However, that's a downside to startups. But that's another thing. I mean, when I say don't be married to your company, the first thing is, don't think your company, the people at your company might care. They might really care. But when it comes down to it, they're going to care about their stability and their paycheck more than they are yours. And that's not being mean or evil. It's just the way things are. So I worked for Cisco for 16 years, and I was laid off. And I married myself to Cisco pretty much for 16 years. And I was forced out of that mold. And even after I left Cisco, I tried to stay in Cisco-friendly territory. And finally, I realized there's a big world out there. I don't need to be in Cisco-friendly territory all the time. I don't need to work Cisco adjacent all the time. I can work on Juniper stuff. I can work on Linux stuff. There's lots of things I can do. But it took me a long time to learn that lesson. And I think that we often in our first job get into a company like Cisco and say, oh, and by the way, I've even been involved in groups where the entire purpose of the group was to find a job at Cisco, as crazy as that is, but that's what they did. And then we get married to that. We get totally, we bleed Cisco blue or Cisco red or whatever it is, or Juniper blue or whatever it is. And things change. And so your career is your career. Don't and the other thing I mean when I say that is, don't let a company suck up all your time. There are companies, particularly in big hyperscale world, where they will serve you breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They will give you Thanksgiving meal to bring home to your family. They will take care of you. They will give you childcare. They will fill your car up with gas and in the parking lot. I mean, I've worked for companies like this. And the problem with this is you end up with no other life. And that's a bad thing. You need to have a life outside of your career, for real. Friends and organizations you belong to and stuff that you do. You just do.
And we're seeing that right now, I mean, it's happening with a lot of layoffs. For example, Cisco just announced big layoffs. And that's one of the things is you can't take this stuff personally. It's not saying you're not a good worker or we don't like you or we like somebody else better and they're staying. It has nothing. When you get laid off, especially in technology, it has nothing to do with how important you are or were or anything like that. It's a business decision.
Yeah.
And I also
and by the way, even if it is about you personally, Even if there is something that's happened that caused you to get trapped in that layoff, don't take it personally, right? Don't become the victim. You're not a victim. Number one rule, you're not a victim. It doesn't matter what anybody else does to you. The only thing that matters is how you react to what they do to you. That's what really matters.
Yeah.
So, don't be passive. Oh, I was laid off, so therefore my life is going to be horrible, blah, 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 blah. Whatever. Deal, get on with it. Because that's the only way to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what, take care, think of yourself first. One of the things I always remind students is, when you retire, when you get, old, like, up there in the years like me, I know that, I've tried to take care of myself over the years, because I know when I retire, the companies I've worked for, they don't care. They're not going to
Nope.
care about what my health is like or anything like that. So be sure that you take care of yourselves while, you come first, company comes second.
Right. In that realm. Right. Now, I would counter that by a little bit by saying, just like we did in the podcast I just recorded, like, okay, the goal or the key to happiness in this work and the key to really being good is to be self-forgetful, but not being self-forgetful in the way that I don't care at all what happens to me, more self-forgetful in the way of, and this, by the way, is how people marry themselves to their companies as well, just as an aside, is they think, I want that next promotion. I want that next pay raise. I want to speak there. I want to do, they think about all these things in terms of I, rather than thinking about in terms of, I need to solve a problem. What problem am I solving? Financial security for myself, for my family, for the next 20 years. That's the problem I'm solving. Let me apply myself to that problem and think about how these other things can be used. Or growth. If it's not financial success, it's growth and making friends and being a whole person. Those are perfectly admirable goals to go after. My goal has always been more to be of a full person rather than anything else, like financial success or anything, or notoriety or whatever it might happen to be. But I was going to say, when I'm writing a book, I'm not thinking about, oh, it's going to make me X amount of money or it's going to do this. I'm thinking more about how can I put this out there to help other people? Yeah, there's going to be a paycheck from it. That's a necessity for life. That's what's got to happen, right? But what am I actually targeting when I'm doing the work is not my own gain, if that makes sense, Rick. I don't know. That's kind of
bringing it back a little bit to kind of getting students, thinking about preparing for that first job and stuff. And you kind of alluded this a little bit with communication skills and certifications and stuff, but what would you say, like preparing for an interview or preparing that application, what advice might you give for students, like how to get ready, or what is it that employers are looking for?
Yeah, interesting. It's so hard to tell, so hard to answer the question of what are employers looking for, because it's so varied. Most employers today are looking for a skill set that allows you to hit the ground running. The reality is, as a student, you're probably not going to have that skill set out the door. It's just not going to happen. So what you need to emphasize or focus on is going to be things like ability to learn, flexibility, the ability to get in the game, to make an impact, and to be a good team fit. People don't leave jobs, they leave managers and teams. That's what they leave. They actually don't leave jobs. Most people will tolerate the most horrible work in the world as long as their coworkers are there and their manager makes them, is a good manager. But if the job is great and the coworkers and the manager are horrible, then, nothing's going to work. All the technical junk in the world is not going to be helpful in that environment. Yeah. So, preparing for the first job and first job interviews, I would say practice. I would say learn how to push back. When people ask stupid questions, don't be afraid to push back. I know you don't have the experience to back it up, and maybe you feel like you need that first job so desperately bad, which I get. I totally understand that. But I also don't want you to be afraid to say, you know what, that's just not really a valid question. That's just not really, I'm not going there in this interview, right? And I also don't want you to be afraid as an interviewee to say, so how many people in this team have been promoted out of this team? How many people in this team have switched to another team in the last 5 years? And where'd they go? Or how many people left? And why did they leave? And, you know, were they leaving for opportunities? And were there good opportunities at the end of that stay or not? Don't be afraid to ask those kinds of questions and to push back. I don't know, Rick, that's not all very good answer, but yeah, that's kind of.
No, it's hard. It's hard when you're just first starting out. Like, you know, how do you stand out from others, especially when you, like what you said, a lot of employers are looking for a certain skill set right out the gate. And, you don't have that right out of college. Even with certifications, degrees, whatever, even internships, you still don't necessarily have that skill set. But
Yeah.
I do.
I mean, you're walking into an employer and they're going to say, we want you to know how to work on an F5 firewall. Right. How many people know how to work on that, or we want you to know how to work on this specific thing. It's always going to be this. I remember going through interviews when I was younger and people would say, do you know Foxbase, which was an alternative to XBase? And I'm like, well, it's the same thing as XBase, isn't it? It's the same language. And they're like, yeah, but we're looking specifically. We have an application in Foxbase. I mean, that's the kind of thing you run into. And you have to learn how to push around that. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I agree. And I would normally just say, if you could show that enthusiasm, motivation, like, no, I can figure this out. That sounds interesting. I can do this, let them know that, you may not know it, but you've got the interest, the motivation, the enthusiasm that you can figure it out.
Yeah.
Just to, kind of wrap things up a little bit. So one of the things that, we've created here, both at Cabrillo College, UCSC, and I've got some other people that are involved from elsewhere, is, we're trying to, like an organization, and you're our first guest speaker here as part of all this. What kind of advice would you give as far as getting out there, networking, with people, knowing what's going on out there and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's also very hard because there's so much of it. So before COVID, I would have said go to conferences. Now, on the other hand, there's still conferences out there, NOGs in particular, network operator groups in particular, that are very good, and things like the NetDev conference and IETF and stuff. Now, of course, the other problem is that travel is difficult. Like, I have no travel budget right now, so I don't really fly anywhere. But I have 20 years of going to the IETF and other stuff and relationships I built over that time. So that's always one thing you can do. Now, another thing you can do is you can jump on things like the Packet Pusher Slack. You can find Slacks and groups. Puck Nether has a list, just a list announcing outages. And like just keeping up with the current outages is interesting. You can get on the NANOG mailing list. You can go to KY. I'm going to be speaking to KYNOG pretty soon. So there are all these regional network operators groups.
That's
you can go
NOG,
to
by the way, Network
Meetup.
Operators Group.
Yeah, NOG. Yeah, Network Operators Group. You can go on Meetup and find people. And if you don't find anybody on Meetup you want to talk to, or the group you want to join, then create one. So there's all those avenues. Another avenue is to volunteer to mentor. I know you're just out of college, but you can go up at a high school. You can teach kids at a high school how to do network engineering. You can join writers groups and learn to write. You can blog. Now, a lot of people think you shouldn't blog unless you get 10,000 followers. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, my blog doesn't get 10,000 hits. Okay, it doesn't. And honestly, I, for a long time, took the statistics off my WordPress homepage because I don't want to care how many people are reading my blog. I don't want to care how many people are interacting with my stuff. I hardly ever look at the hedge statistics. It's more about building a body of work over time that people can see what you've done. Number one, it will have an impact on the community, and that's always a good thing. And number two, it builds a body of work over time that people learn to trust you, that you're in the community. You're a part of the community. Final piece of advice is open source. Get involved in an open source project, however you can. Even if you jump over to FR routing and you say, I'm just going to help you rewrite all the documentation for FR routing. Awesome. We could use the help. So get involved in the communities where you can.
And don't feel too intimidated about you have to get involved in big stuff or wherever you can start. Just start building, whatever you can. Kind of start wrapping things up here because I know you have a meeting, but like putting together some kind of portfolio. Do you think that's something?
Yeah,
and
right.
this club, even these events are important to let people know that you're actually getting hands-on and you're listening to people like, Russ White here.
So go to a hackathon, participate in virtual hackathons. They're really cool. If you blog, you're like, well, what do I blog about? Well, build yourself a little lab and write blog posts about what you've learned in your lab. So what if everybody else, is doing the same thing and writing the same stuff? That's not what's important. What's important is that you're doing it. That's what's important. I see there's a question, by the way, over in the chat.
Yeah. So so someone asked, how big of an impact is the cloud going to have on networking in the future?
This is a jinxed question, man. This is crystal ball. The one thing that's back there is not a crystal ball. I don't have one. Mine broke many years ago, but here's my sense. Things have largely permanently changed in the networking world in a couple of ways. First of all, even for people who aren't in public cloud services, they are still largely buying average, I hate the word enterprise, but the average network operator that doesn't use the network as their source of income, like Akamai does, or a provider, even a hyperscaler or social media network. Everybody's pretty much now coloing and putting all their hardware in some professional building where people focus on just the hardware bits. So you're starting to see one of the reasons we did the CCDE is we saw a bifurcation between NOC and design, between network operations and design. And we thought we needed, we need to have something for designers. We need to have something out there for designers and not just operations folks. And the CCIE is very operationally oriented certification. So we're seeing a bifurcation between hardware and software now, which is actually okay with me. That's fine. So there's going to be a career choice at some point about whether I want to work on hardware or software. That's fine. But that is an impact of the cloud stuff. Another thing that's going on is there's always this hype cycle where people say, oh, cloud is so much cooler than on-premises or even privately off-premises, private cloud off-premises or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And it goes on for like 4 or 5 years. And then people start going, well, it costs me a lot of money to put that stuff in the cloud and I've lost control of my data. And there's such a thing as data gravity. So I'm going to start withdrawing it. We're starting to see companies repatriating their data out of the cloud. So the impact today has been kind of to force this bifurcation between software and hardware and between design and make the divide between operations and design a little more clear in our minds. 5 to 10 years, I don't know that you'll see anything happen beyond making those divisions clearer. And so if you work for somebody like Disney or Bank of America or whoever else, you're mostly going to be dealing with software, probably not hardware so much any longer, except in the core. And of course, the network core is still going to be there because you can't get in campus. You can't get around those network core and campus. But you'll probably be working less with hardware and more with software because the hardware geeks are largely going to be at the providers. So that's one thing that you want to think about what's coming in the next 5 to 10 years. Now, another thing this means from a career perspective is you need to intentionally decide, do I want to work for a vendor? Do I want to work for a provider? Do I want to work for a network services company? What do I want to do? And do I want to stay there? Or do I want to intentionally move slots so that I gain experience in a lot of different areas? So those are decisions you have to make. You know, you might be happy working like Adrian's worked for Juniper worked for Juniper. He's been on the equipment side of things his entire career. That's fine, right? Well, I don't actually know. Has he worked for, I don't know. I've mostly been on the equipment side, but I've worked for providers. And so, and hyperscalers. So you've got to like think through, what does that look like? So again, no crystal ball, but those are just things to think about.
Is it fair to say though, Russ, I mean, when, people fear the cloud, that everything's moved to the cloud, but like here at UCSC and Cabrillo College, we still have all the networking gear. I mean, there's not like a box that everybody connects to, and we don't use anything networking here at all. There's still a lot that is happening, enough to keep both IT departments more than busy, what's happening here, along with anything that they've located in the cloud. And the cloud itself is just another representation of the same stuff. It's that fair to say? Would you?
Yep, definitely. Yeah, I don't think network engineering is going anywhere as a skill set.
Means not.
I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that there's ever been a pure network engineering position anyway, honestly. Maybe, but not in my career. I've never had one, never seen one. So it's just a matter of mixture of skills and what your focus is for the most part. That's kind of my impression of where things are.
Well, Russ, I want to first of all thank you for your time.
No, thanks
We're
for having me.
definitely going to be having
man.
you back.
Fine.
And how do students and others, network engineers, whoever's listening to this, keep in touch with you, know what's going on?
Well, there's always rule11.tech, which is my blog for whatever it's worth, and the hedge.
And I'll put these all in the comments so people have
that's
access
cool.
to this.
I don't write enough on rule11.tech. I've been trying to push myself to write more, but I'm writing so many other things right now that I'm kind of like a little bit, like a couple of weeks ago, I said I'm gonna start writing an hour a day, and 1,000 words a day, which takes me about an hour to write. That's typically 500 to 1,000 words in an hour, depending on what I'm working on. And it's just like, I've just gotten so busy again that it's hard to keep up with it. But that is a goal of mine, is to write more. So I may be writing more on the hedge. You can always find me on the Packet Pusher Slack if you jump on there. I'm always around that. I have a Slack, hardly anybody's on, NetArch, but hardly anybody's on that one. So it's not as fun as the Packet Pusher Slack. And
I'll share these with everybody and put them in the comments.
And I'm on X, of course, and LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the place I pay the most attention to. I log into LinkedIn once a day most of the time. I don't keep
I'm not
apps
the
on my
only one
phone.
that uses LinkedIn. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, LinkedIn is great for computer professionals. It's probably a premier place to get jobs.
Thank you.
Sure.
They're always hearing me talk about LinkedIn. They're like, oh, I got to create an account. Yeah, you got to create. But, well, Russ, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Good seeing you, my friend. And look forward to having you back.
Yeah, come out and visit me sometime, man. Yeah,
definitely. And next time you're in this area, if you're traveling again, let me know.
Yep, sure will. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Russ.
Thanks, guys. Have fun.
Thanks.